Hey everyone, I am your host Eric Mueller, and welcome back to the Eric Mueller Show, the podcast where we explore what makes any successful person's inner clock tick. What if I told you that the keys to all of the doors that you need opened are in other people's pockets? You'd probably ask, how can we meet the right people to help us unlock this success? Enter Michael Roderick, the CEO of Small Pond Enterprises. Michael's here today to help you develop the kinds of relationships that will motivate people to hand you those keys. When Michael went from high school teacher to Broadway producer in under 2 years, people started to ask him how he managed it. No matter who is across the table, no matter what you might want or need from them, it's important to remember that we are all people first. Michael's relationship strategy hinges on treating people like people and from helping those around you to achieve their versions of success. He's also the host of the podcast Access to Anyone, which shows how you can get to know anyone you want in business and life using these time-tested relationship-building principles. He teaches skills such as crafting effective introductions, structuring win-win partnerships, evaluating and tracking existing relationships, and activating the law of weak ties. Michael encourages his clients and followers to take the attitude of being the CEO of you. Are you ready to unlock your version of success? Let's head on over to the interview. All right, welcome back to the Eric Mueller Show, the podcast where we explore what makes any successful person's inner clock tick. Today, I'm happy to welcome Michael Roderick to the show to teach us how to make our great ideas more accessible, influential, and memorable. Now, as the founder and CEO of Small Pond Enterprises, Michael believes that connecting and collaborating with the right people is the key to your success. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here, Michael, and you're also a host of a podcast yourself, the Access to Anyone podcast. Would you share just briefly that story of starting that show? Had you always wanted to be a podcaster, or how did that come to be?
Sure. So it actually started because a friend of mine, Michael Shine, had reached out to me, and I had made a bunch of intros for him, and I had connected them to what he felt were some very interesting people. So he just kind of reached out to me and said, hey, you are introducing me to all these interesting folks, and I've been kind of starting this podcast thing. Would you want to host a podcast together? And we started to, we get together to sort of talk about it. And, at the time I was doing a lot of work still in the relationship building side of things. I was doing a lot of work with, connectors and helping people connect in that process. And I basically was like, well, I think it would have to have some kind of theme that ties to the work that we do. And the more that we talked about it, we realized, oh, well, most people are very curious about access. They're very curious about sort of how do I connect with the people that I want to connect with? How do I meet those people that I've always kind of dreamed of meeting? So in that coffee shop, we sort of came up with the idea of Access to Anyone. And then we just got together. We did our first couple of episodes. We interviewed each other. And then we basically started to find, friends and colleagues who we thought, I think it'd be fun to talk to them about their relationship building process, the stuff that they're doing. And then it just kind of took off from there. And we did the show for a while until Michael Shine went off to work on a book about the topic of hype. And then I took it over, and I've just been continuing to run it ever since.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really unique concept of, if you could access anybody in the world. Like, I think you mentioned to me pre-interview that you have a tag question that you ask every single guest, and that's, if you could have access to anybody and they have to be a live person today, who would it be? What is your answer to that, Michael?
Yeah, so my answer is J.J. Abrams. I have loved all the things that J.J. Abrams has created. But I read about him in this book, Smart Cuts by Shane Snow, which I think is just a fascinating, really, really interesting book about sort of how people skip the line in their careers in many cases. And one of the things that he talks about in Smart Cuts about J.J. Abrams is that unlike a lot of people in Hollywood who would sort of just try to sort of like make their own way, the way that J.J. Abrams sort of grew to the level that he was at was he would actually partner with established writers on all sorts of different projects. So he was always like in that kind of collaborative mindset. And that just in and of itself fascinates me about him. And, it's like, how does he think about sort of this aspect of collaboration and sort of building that, but also just like the types of content that he creates are these fascinating pieces that are always just getting you to say, well, what's happening next? Like, where's that going? And anybody who's ever watched Lost, knows what I'm talking about, right? Where it's just like, he has such a talent for figuring out a way to craft something that you just are like, I need to know what happens in the next episode. So I would love to have a conversation with him.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting, especially those who've seen Lost. I mean, I was not as huge of a fanboy as some were, but I vividly remember watching some episodes and just being like, I have no idea how this is going to pan out. This is just this is taking, but it provokes that interest, and you have such a strong desire to see it out and figure out the answer. So yeah, maybe at some point you can meet him and have that discussion.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Maybe at some point I'll have him on the show.
Right. Yeah. Man, that'd be great to ask him his question, then give him your answer. But yeah, Michael, I think so. It's kind of a perfect segue into what you do at Small Pond right now is in fact that you tell people that the keys to all the doors that you need opened are in other people's pockets. That's your company philosophy. I just love that. Will you share with us, like, how can we access these keys, so to speak, and why is it so important that we know that collaborating with others is the way to reach our goals?
Yeah. So the thing is, no matter what sort of stumbling blocks or challenges we have, there are people in the world who they've already gone past that. Those stumbling blocks to them are the building blocks of their business and of their future. So there's always people who basically have taken the time to learn the things that maybe we just don't know yet, right? And that we don't sort of, understand yet, or that we don't see. And in some cases, there are people who they've developed the relationships that we don't have yet, right? Like we haven't quite figured out how to have those conversations and sort of get to know those people. So the way that I always think about it is, if you are taking the time to sort of look at, well, what are those gaps for those people, right? And you're like talking to somebody and you're saying, okay, well, how are they achieving what they want to achieve? And where are the gaps? Who are the people that maybe they don't know yet? Or what are the things that they don't have yet? And you're constantly kind of looking at the world through other people's eyes, right? And you're thinking, okay, I met this person. They've told me that they have this challenge, or they told me that they have this issue. Who do I know, or what could I provide that would sort of help them achieve those goals that they have? Well, what usually ends up happening is that a lot of those people will then want to collaborate with you. And one of the things I often say about this is that people love to feel useful. They hate to feel used. So if you can craft a way to work with people where you are helping them see how they can be useful in the achievement of your goals, and you can be useful in the achievement of theirs, just so many opportunities come up. And that's really what I'm talking about when I talk about the idea of those keys being in other people's pockets.
Okay. Yeah. And building off of that even further. So we know that we need these keys that other people have in order to build towards our goals. How do we find the right people? How do we know that we're going after the right keys for those goals? I mean, is there any, like, I guess, hint to this process, or is it just a kind of a trial and error on who you can provide the most value to and get it in return?
Yeah, well, I think that there are basically the way I like to kind of break it down is that there are people who have a certain driver to their personality. And the way that I like to think about this is A, B, C, and D. So your A's are your advocates, and advocates are people who they tend to just want to help. right? They want to support people. They want to just like you'll know you're meeting an advocate in a meeting because you will likely be the one talking almost the entire time, because they will ask you so many questions about yourself, and they will want to learn everything that they can learn about you. And then they will basically say, oh, I know somebody you should talk to, or I know a way to help you achieve the things that you want to achieve. And there are certain people who they just like, that's their driving force, is being an advocate for others. What's fascinating about that is that advocates are often awful when it comes to advocating for themselves. So they love helping others, they love supporting others, but they are usually not proactive in sort of letting you know what it is that they need and what it is that they're looking for. So in many cases in your relationships with advocates, you have to be proactive in asking them about what they need, because often they will not mention it. They will not talk about it, right? So if somebody's driving force, if they are more of an advocate in regards to sort of the way that they operate, there's a very good chance that they're going to be able to be helpful to you and supportive, to you very quickly. It's just sort of part of an advocate's nature. The B's are the boomerangs, and the boomerangs are the people who kind of operate in a way that is mostly transactional. So they'll always sort of, treat things in the context of let's, figure out a way where if you do this thing for me, I'll do this thing for you. And it's very structured. There's really not a lot of giving that happens sort of within that dynamic. And you'll know when you're dealing with a boomerang, because in the conversation, you're going to feel it. You're going to tell that there's a transactional nature to it, because they're going to say, okay, I'll do this for you. I want this in return. Like they'll always kind of lay it out for you, right? The C's are the celebrities. And these are the people who they've already kind of reached a level where like everybody knows them and they're sought after. So they're actually going to be much more guarded about everything that they do. They're going to be more guarded about the intros that they make, the things that they make happen. They're going to be much more careful about any of these sort of relationship dynamics, because their reputation is always kind of going out when it comes to sort of the help and the support. And then the final category and the final driver is the drains. And these are the folks who are kind of in that place where they're in such a high state of need that they can't even kind of imagine doing anything for anybody else. They're really kind of in that place where they need so much during that time that that most of your interaction with them is going to be them asking you for things and looking for help and support from you. And the thing that I always like to stress about this, because it's so important, is that we all have different drivers during different points in our lives. So it's not that drains are bad. It's just that, if there is a moment in your life where things are really hard, you're probably going to have more of a need to just receive. You're not really going to be in a place to do a lot of giving. And it's just, we all have those moments. We all have those times. So I always just like to stress the fact that in these interactions, as you're having these conversations and you're noticing these drivers, to understand that those drivers may literally be the driver for that day. It may not be, the main driver of that individual. There's so many factors outside of our control that, change that dynamic. But generally speaking, if you encounter people who fall into that advocate category, you are probably going to have a lot more opportunities, because they're going to just be very conscious and thoughtful about helping you and supporting you. And if you're one of the few people, because most people just kind of are like, wow, that person's so nice, they probably don't need anything. That's sort of the attitude that a lot of people take. If you're the person who really does ask that person about what they need and what they're looking for, you're going to stand out from everybody else, because anytime you're a person who gives and supports and helps, most people will make the assumption that you don't need anything, because how could you possibly be doing so much giving and helping and supporting if you did need things?
Right. Yeah. So we're looking for ideally people that are advocates that we can provide. I mean, we could both be advocates. Would that be the ideal scenario, Michael?
Yes, exactly. Being advocates for each other. If you want to grow any opportunity, find people who align with your values and talk to each other about how you can raise each other up. And there's this really great fable. It's an Aesop's fable, and it's about this crow, and there's this pitcher of water. And in the bottom of the pitcher is this little tiny bit of water, and the crow can't reach the water. So what the crow does is the crow starts dropping stones into the pitcher, and eventually the water rises and the crow is able to drink. And it's the same thing. If we bring in those advocates into our lives, if we connect with others who are interested in helping us in the same way that we're interested in helping them, and we're always thinking about sort of how do we all rise together, we're going to just move faster when we develop relationships within that way. So you get a group of people together and you're basically like, well, how do we just sort of support each other, right? And you've been to some of my events, and like that's the attitude of I have an event called GEM, which is Generous Entrepreneurs in Media. And we get together these podcast guests and podcast hosts. And the idea is get to know each other and just help each other, right? Like just support each other, be advocates for each other, because you'll all rise that much faster, right? There will be so much opportunity by just having a conversation about how can we support each other, and what are people looking for help with, and growing together.
Right. And Michael, even at that most recent GEM meeting that I was at, it was virtual. And I thought going into that, honestly, the last thing on my mind was what can I get from these people? It was more like, how can I contribute to this group and be of value to them? So less of that transactional, like not expecting anything in return, but kind of like that fable and the Aesop. Honestly, that threw me right back to grade school. You're just hearing that name, but adding in those pebbles, so to speak, and putting in the value first, you're going to create that sense of them wanting to pay it back to you. I feel like at least that's kind of the sense I got. The more you give, the more you receive.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think it's really important. There's a concept that I call the giver's fix, which I think is very, very important, because there's a lot of material out there that talks about, giving and without expectation of return and helping others, and it'll all come back to you and all of these things. But what's really, really important is to make sure that you are asking for the things that you need as well, and that you're communicating to people what it is that you need and what you could use help with. And the giver's fix, the concept behind it is every time we give, every time we do something for somebody else, it releases a chemical in the body. And some say it's oxytocin, some say it's dopamine, but regardless of whatever chemical it ends up being, you are going to get a rush as a result of giving or doing something for someone else. The danger is getting hooked on that rush, and just like an addict, never taking care of yourself. So never actually communicating to people what it is that you need, what it is that you need help with, what it is that you need support with. So that's one of the reasons why I often will create these environments where I'm saying, no, you each need to talk to each other about what you could use help with and support with. Because if you are that type of giver, your default is to not ask. So you want to have a space, a safe space where you can ask, where you can let people know what it is you could use support with, and you know that the other people in the room are happy to support you.
Yeah, I think that is, I mean, honestly, that hits the nail on the head as far as what I want to know in regard to, how to find the right people to give me the keys, and after I've given them something myself, but to give me the keys to get to the next level. And something I really liked on your website, Small Pond Enterprise, was relationship strategy, and kind of explaining that concept about taking it from, not transactional, but more to a relational connection with people, Why is relationship strategy so important, maybe as the beginning step to this process, Michael? Or, maybe is there a
Sure.
step we should look at even before that?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is we can basically sort of scattershot develop relationships if we want, right? Like we can go to all the networking events, we can do all the things, right? And get to know a ton of people. But if we don't know what it is we're trying to accomplish before all of that happens, we might be developing a whole bunch of relationships that actually don't make sense for what we're trying to do. So that's why we want to start with a strategy. We want to start with saying, okay, well, what am I trying to accomplish? Like, what are my goals? What are the things that I actually do want? Because how often do we really make the time to ask that question? And basically,
Right.
like, well, what is it that I actually want? Right. And then once you've got the answer to that, then you can say, okay, well, based on that, what types of relationships could help me with those types of things? And then you could start to think about, okay, well, if those are the types of relationships I need, if those are the types of relationships that are going to help me achieve the things that I want, where should I be focusing my efforts? Where should I be spending my time? What conversations should I be in? What conversations should I not be in? If this is my goal, if this is what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and Michael, I want to tie this to a real world example, actually, your personal background, your experience from going as a high school English teacher to a Broadway producer in under 2 years. I'm guessing you probably leveraged some right connections during that. Walk us through that process and,
Sure.
why that was so instrumental to you getting to that goal.
Yeah. So I had always been in the theater world. I had learned about Broadway, and I had done an internship with a Broadway producer by the name of Ken Davenport. And I learned a ton sort of within that, internship about sort of how Broadway worked. And one of the things that I learned was that basically to be a Broadway producer, you needed to raise money and you needed to do it well. There really wasn't, much that you could do if you weren't proficient at raising money. But the thing that I saw time and time again was that when people wanted to become a Broadway producer, they would go to other producers and they'd say, I will raise this amount of money for you to get credit on this show. Right. So they would want to have the credit of being the producer, and they would sort of make the promise that they would raise a certain amount of money. And when I realized that, I said, okay, if everybody's going for credit, what if I don't? And what if I just go for learning? So what I did was I started going to other producers and saying, listen, I really just want to get better at raising money. So right now, I can't guarantee that I'm going to raise any massive amount for you. I can't ask you to give me credit on anything because I don't even know how well I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're willing to give me some paperwork on your projects, I'm more than happy to reach out and see if I can find some investors for you and see if it works out. And when I was approaching them from that standpoint, a lot of people just gave me their paperwork, right? And they were like, yeah, kid, give it a shot, see what you can do. But the effect of that, which was completely different than almost everybody else that was raising money at the time, was that when people were going and raising money, they were usually on one show. So they were going to an investor and they were saying, hey, do you want to invest in this show? And that investor was either going to say yes or no. I was going to investors with a portfolio.
Oh, yeah.
So it was like, oh, you don't want to be involved in that. I've got like 6 others, are you interested in any of those? So I ended up having lots of instances where I was either able to introduce investors to projects, or I was able to bring people on and help them become producers. So word got around that I was raising that money and I was supporting all of these different types of people. So I was eventually approached by another producer who was just like, listen, if you can raise this amount, I'd love to give you credit on this show. So they just offered it to me, and I went out and I raised that money and I got my first Broadway credit.
Look at how that works. You gave, not expecting that, and you ended up getting it in return. The exact point of giving the value first. I think that's insane.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like the thing you always have to remember is that there's always going to be a reciprocity impulse and a reciprocity timeline when it comes to people. And I think that the mistake that we make is that we think reciprocity just sort of operates the same for everybody, right? And not everybody has the same reciprocity impulse, and not everybody has the same reciprocity timeline. So I'll talk about reciprocity impulse first. So basically, there are certain people who, if you give something to them, they need to give you something back right away because it feels like a hot potato. They're just like, I can't have you give me something and not feel like I need to give you something back. But there are also people who, if you give them something, they just kind of expect that people give them things and they don't give you anything back. Like, that's just not that's not the way that they operate. They have a very low reciprocity impulse. And, you would have to inform them that you would like something in return in order to be able to have them even acknowledge that or sort of think about that, versus people who you just do something for them, they want to do something for you immediately. The same thing applies to a reciprocity timeline. There are some people who they basically will give back almost immediately, and then there are other people who they will spend time vetting you and figuring out sort of like what your story is before they give back, because they've been burned before when they've given something back, right? And they've been burned before when they've sort of been in that reciprocity sort of side of things. So I think like the thing that's really important, and the thing that I always recommend people just be conscious of, is don't take these concepts as absolutes. Don't take these concepts as, oh, well, if I just, go out there and give, everything will just sort of, come back to me. Who knows sort of how that's going to happen? The universe is on its own timeline, right? So don't do it with the impression that, oh, it's all going to sort of magically work out. You've got to let people know what it is that you need help with. You've got to find advocates and people who will support you in your journey. You've got to learn things to help you get to where you want to get. And I think the mistake is that so much of the content that is out there about relationship building does not address this nuance. And basically it's just like, well, just give and it'll all work out. And it's like, no. That's not yes, every once in a while, something just kind of randomly works out, but like, why make it so that you are not in control of your life and you're hoping that reciprocity saves you? Don't put yourself in that position. Make sure that people know what it is that you need. Make sure that you're taking control of those, of those conversations so that you're not just waiting around for something to just magically end up coming back to you. I just think that so many people end up what I like to refer to as connection rich and cash poor, where everybody loves them, but they're never able to sell whatever it is that they're able to sell. They're never able to get their business off the ground because they spend all of this time just worshiping the god of reciprocity and hoping that something's going to magically fix their problems. And the thing is, you've got to be intentional about all of this, and you've got to make sure that people know what it is that you need.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of like the difference between just wishing for something without taking any action and having a dream where you actually have like a drive and a vision behind it and you're taking action. One is going to see results and know where it's coming from. It's their action. And the other, if it happens, it's kind of just like luck. If you're just wishing that you win the lottery and you buy a ticket and you win, it's like you didn't really do anything to do that. I mean, sure, you bought the ticket, but so interesting point. And I think it also perfectly ties in with another part of your philosophy and your company is being the CEO of you. And no matter where you are in your level of success is to take that attitude. So I think that's super important for people listening, that obviously you want to be an advocate for other people, but you want to take control and not be used. Like you mentioned earlier, you want to be useful, but not be used. So I think that's a super important piece too.
Yeah, it is. It's so important. And I think that we always have to be conscious of, are we doing the things that we can control? Like, are we, whenever we're struggling, whenever we're having a challenge, like we always have to ask, am I doing the things that I can control? Or am I putting all of my faith in things that I cannot control? And that is such an important point that we often forget, especially in the early stages. If you're, in the early stages of entrepreneurship, I see so many entrepreneurs putting so much into the things that they can't control. You cannot control if somebody buys from you, but you can certainly control how well you craft the offer so that they are interested in buying from you. So work on the things that you can control. You can't control whether or not you randomly meet people to have a conversation about, working with you or doing something from a business standpoint, but you can certainly control having conversations with people about who would be good referrals, or reaching out to people who you think would be a good fit and having conversations with them about what it is that you do and what it is that you offer. Pay attention to those things that you can control. It is so, so important.
Yeah, that's an incredibly good point too. And I think it's making me think, what can I control and what can you control as a listener in your definition of success? I mean, that is something that you can control, is how you define that and where you are going on the roadmap from your point A. What is your point B? So Michael, what would you say your definition of success is right now? And has it changed over time, or has it remained the same?
Yeah, I think my definition of success now is being able to do whatever I want, to be perfectly honest, right? There's this really great saying, I think it was the Beatles, who they were basically like, if I want a swimming pool, I'll just write a song. Right. And then it's like, I've written it and now I've got a swimming pool. Right. And when you get to a point in entrepreneurship where all you basically are like, okay, if I need more money, if I need more opportunities, I simply need to create this offer and sell it. Right. And then it just, it solves whatever that problem is, whatever that issue is. So for me, that's where it is. Being able to be like, I know that no matter where things are, if things, if there's a downturn, if there's a huge issue, if suddenly we end up, in another lockdown, God forbid, right? I know that I am in control of what I can create. And I know that I can create value that will get other people to give me value for those things I create. Right. So for me, that's the definition. But I think early on, going back, it wasn't that. It lived in that world of things that I couldn't control. Right. For me, success was, make this amount of money. Right.
Yeah.
Have the, be at this 6-figure limit, 7-figure limit, all the things that all of the marketers tell you that you're supposed to want, right? Because that's the purpose of marketing, right? To basically get us to a point where we want whatever the thing is that's being marketed, right?
Right.
And that's the dynamic. So in the early stages of my entrepreneurial career, success was always one of those things that people told me that I should want, right? And that I should look for. And it wasn't until later on in my life that I basically realized, no, success is just being able to do what I want. It's not having those things that everybody's telling me I should want. It's being able to do what I want.
Yeah, Michael, that honestly is spot on for how I viewed success when I started this show. It was tied to a monetary metric or a title. You are a CEO of X, Y, or Z, and you make X amount of dollars. That was what I thought it was at first. And I mean, honestly, my definition has changed and shapen over time. It sounds like yours has as well in that way. And kind of the next question, really the mission of this podcast was to find out what keeps successful people's inner clocks ticking towards the success that they define for themselves. So I honestly, I think the more I think about that, the more I think that's something that's not in our control. What drives you? It's something that's just innate within us, and it maybe will change over time how you pursue it. But for you, Michael, what is the driving force that just keeps you pushing towards success?
Yeah. So I would say the theme throughout everything I've ever done, everything I've created, whether it be that when I worked in theater or whether it be when I was, running a conference for connectors, all the way to the work that I do today with people in the thought leadership space, it's always been driven by this idea of I know what it's like to feel alone. I know what it's like to feel like the outcast, and I don't want others to have to go through that frustration and that aggravation. Right. So for me, that's always been the driver. That's always been the thing that I've always thought about. It's like, well, what are the things that make it so that somebody does not feel alone? And whether it be that, it's a conference or a gathering, or whether it be it's helping them make sure that their thought leadership content is accessible, whether it be that it's, having conversations with people about the value that they provide in the world. For me, it always lands in that place of not wanting others to feel alone and sort of set apart and feel like nobody gets it and nobody's able to help me, to always help people feel like they have something, with them. So that would be what comes to mind for me when I think about that.
Yeah. And I think it to your earlier point of the ABCD and advocate, you're wanting to be an advocate for someone to feel included, but you're at the same time you're not sacrificing like your own goals and ambitions for that. You're using, you're trying to advance both people in the situation, and that's the benefit of the collaboration and the networking that your company strives to teach people.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, and Michael, another fun piece of this podcast, fairly recent addition. I'm really on a mission to discover how successful people invest, so to speak, in themselves to build the foundation for their success. So really, what makes up their success portfolio? So people that know finance, that compilation of your investments, that's your financial portfolio, pushes you toward your finance goals. But really, I want to find out more of those intangible, like you can't touch them, soft skills maybe, so to speak, that make up a success portfolio for an individual like yourself. Are there any top skills or traits or habits or mindsets that you have found really focus and make up that core of your portfolio?
Yeah. There's a couple there's a couple of things. And yeah, when I was thinking about this question, it's like, there's so many things, right?
Oh, yeah.
There are a couple that really stand out. And the one that I would say has served me better than pretty much anything else, I would say just across the board, is I have this attitude and I have this philosophy of I give myself permission to suck is the way that is the way that I look at it. And basically, the way that I think about things is that there's no way to be consistent and brilliant. I'm going to have days where things really work. I'm going to have days where things completely flop. I'm going to, have all sorts of instances where the level of success is going to vary immensely, right? So I constantly look at all of these pieces as new information. Success is new information. Failure is new information. And it's things that I can process and sort of look through and say, okay, well, what can I learn? Right. And I would say that another thing that's really, really useful is basically just always being reflective. I spend so much time reflecting and basically like looking back on an experience and saying, okay, what worked, what didn't, what are the things that I want to sort of test? What are the things that I want to try? What are the things I want to look at next? All of those elements, I'm always reflecting on my experiences. And that really helps. That really, really supports a lot of the work that I do. And then the third thing is a concept that has got me out of a lot of jams. And it's what I call the TCM index. So every single person, no matter who you meet, has an index of time, connections, and money. Every single person has some concern around one of those three things at some point in their life in some way. But whenever there is a deficit in one of those things, it is directly tied to the other two. So if there is a deficit in money, all I ever need to do is look at my time and who I'm spending my time with. If there's a deficit in connections, if I'm not meeting the right people or connecting with the right people, it is directly tied to how I'm spending my time and how I'm spending my money. Because if I'm selling some, large scale product, but I'm going to a free event, it's probably not going to work out so well. Right.
Right.
And then finally, if I am struggling with time, it's directly tied to who am I bringing on and how am I spending my money to get my time back. Right. So anytime I notice a deficit in any one of those three areas, anytime I'm like, man, I don't have enough time, I ask myself, okay, well, what are the things that are taking up all of that time? And what am I doing from a relationship standpoint and from a money standpoint to give me my time back? Anytime I'm in a money situation, I'm asking, well, where am I spending my time and who am I spending my time with? And anytime I'm in a relationship situation where I'm saying, okay, well, who do I know? And like, who am I trying to get into more conversations with? Well, how am I spending my time and what am I spending my money on? What rooms am I spending that money to get into? How is it working? So that for me has always, like, no matter what the deficit ends up being, whenever I end up in that hole, just looking at those other two things is the way that I'm able to get out of it.
Well, if you're listening right now and your mind is not blown, I don't know what to do for you, because this, Michael, I mean, you have provided so much value in this short podcast episode. I can't thank you enough for it. And if you've missed any of it, or if you're listening and you want to go back, I would highlight those sections, the ABCD behavior section, reciprocity impulse and reciprocity timeline. And then this TCM index, that is, Michael, that is honestly genius. I mean, I think hopefully those of you listening right now can think of the areas in your life where you felt a deficiency in one of those categories. And if you just pour more effort into the other two, you can balance that back up.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Michael Roderick, thank you so much for joining us in the Eric Mueller Show today. I've had such a great time conversing with you. And if anyone wants to reach out to you, what would be the best way to contact you?
Sure. They can just go to smallpondenterprises.com. They can see a bunch of stuff there. They can check out the podcast, access to anyone podcast.com. And then I'm all over the socials. So you can always feel free to reach out to me on any of those, on any of those platforms as well.
Perfect. Yeah. We'll tag that all in the show notes as well. And I will say, for those of you listening, that you might think, how did I get connected with this wonderful guy here to have him on the show? And just on the topic of this whole episode, this was a previous guest that referred Michael to me as a guest. So honestly, the power of the connections and networking, it's right there. You just got to show up and be consistent. And I think Michael's done a great job explaining that today. And we appreciate him being on, and we'll look forward to catching up with you soon, sir.
Thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciate it.